The boardroom of Merrow and Gray, perched high above Manhattan's skyline, held the breath of 10 silent executives as Evelyn Merrow, architect, co-founder, and visionary, took her seat at the long oak table. Her husband, Harrison Gray, the firm's CEO, stood at the head of the room, the city reflected in the glass wall behind him. His voice was precise, rehearsed. Effective immediately, Evelyn Merrow is relieved of her position as partner and design lead. For a second, no one moved. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the armrest, her pulse loud in her ears. "Harrison," she said, steady despite the rush of disbelief. "I'm pregnant." A flicker, something between fear and calculation, crossed his face before he laughed, dry and cold. "Convenient timing," he said, then turned to Claudia Voss, who now sat directly beside him. Claudia has been running operations in Evelyn's absence for months. The board has voted to promote her to interim COO. Evelyn scanned the table. Men and women she had mentored, presented alongside, built this firm with, and found no one willing to meet her eyes. Only Claudia did, a slight, triumphant smirk betraying her pleasure. Evelyn sat straighter. "This is orchestrated. You've falsified performance reports." Harrison slid a thick folder across the table. "The evidence says otherwise." But Evelyn didn't reach for it. She knew this moment had been coming. The betrayal had been slow and subtle, like a crack in concrete. Now it was a chasm. The woman who had drafted the blueprints for this empire had just been exiled from her own design. The elevator ride from the boardroom to the lobby felt impossibly long. Evelyn Merrow stood between two security officers she once greeted by name, her face unreadable, her back unbowed. The same polished marble floors she had chosen for their warmth now echoed with the sound of her heels, a cruel rhythm that matched the pounding in her chest. As she passed the open atrium, whispers stirred. Some employees glanced up, others quickly looked away, pretending not to see the co-founder being escorted out like a disgraced guest. The lobby she had designed to symbolize transparency now felt like a stage for humiliation. Still, she kept her chin high. When the guards reached the revolving door, one hesitated. "Miss Merrill, I'm sorry," he said softly. Evelyn's voice was even, her strength intact. "Not your fault. Take care of your daughter, Aaron. She starts school next month, right?" His eyes widened. He hadn't expected her to remember. Outside, the summer air hit her like a wall, thick and unrelenting. She walked to her car alone, unlocked it with steady hands, and slid into the driver's seat with a deliberate calm. Only when the doors shut did her composure begin to crack. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her personal phone, the one Harrison didn't know about. She scrolled past familiar contacts until she found the one marked contingency. She pressed call. A woman answered immediately. "Evelyn, has it begun?" Evelyn stared at the building that bore her name etched in steel. "They made their move," she said quietly, the weight of betrayal finally settling in. "Now it's my turn." Tucked in a quiet corner of Brooklyn Heights, the brownstone looked unassuming from the street, ivy climbing its brick facade, curtains drawn over bay windows. But inside it pulsed with purpose. Evelyn Merrow unlocked the door with a key only she possessed and stepped into her private world, untouched by the politics of Merrow and Gray. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old books, grounding her. This was her sanctuary, purchased in secret 2 years ago when the first cracks in her marriage had started to show. Officially, it was a rental property. In truth, it was her escape hatch, her war room. She walked past architectural sketches taped to the walls, servers humming quietly in the corner, and a drafting table littered with hand-drawn blueprints. Her real legacy. Evelyn sat before her personal laptop, not connected to any firm network, and began pulling files, patent registrations, design blueprints, licensing agreements, all signed, sealed, and dated. Under her maiden name, Evelyn Zhang. The heart of Merrow and Gray had never belonged to Harrison. It had lived in these very lines she'd drawn in solitude, while he'd schmoozed donors and charmed the media. She opened a safe behind a false bookshelf and removed a leather-bound portfolio thick with notarized documents. With steady hands, she placed a call to Naomi Teller, her closest friend and longtime attorney. "We're going forward," she said. "Everything we talked about." Naomi's voice sharpened with focus. "Good. I'll activate the filings." Harrison played his hand. "Now we show him what happens when he underestimates the woman who built the foundation." The Continental's private dining room was dimly lit, wrapped in mahogany and quiet discretion. The kind of place where deals were born or buried. Richard Ellison sat at the corner table, a scotch untouched before him, his expression guarded. At 65, he was a veteran of Manhattan's real estate wars, a man who had seen firms rise and fall on charisma alone. But Ellen Marrow, walking in with calm precision and a leather portfolio in hand, wasn't selling charm. She was bringing receipts. "I'm not here to talk about my firing," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "This is about your investment and the truth behind what you've been told." Richard said nothing as she opened the folder. One by one, she laid out the documents. A patent filed under Evelyn Zhang 3 months before Marrow & Gray's incorporation, a licensing agreement signed by Harrison Gray granting the company use of her designs, internal emails outlining her vision, emails Harrison had presented to the board as his own words. Then came the spreadsheets. Evelyn tapped them lightly. "These show the discrepancies. Fabricated growth reports, buried expenses. It started about 18 months ago, around the time Claudia Voss became Harrison's shadow." Richard studied the evidence, his silence stretching. Then he looked up. "How long have you been preparing for this?" Evelyn met his gaze. "Since the day I realized my name on the building meant less than his handshake at a press event." Richard nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure the next handshake is yours." The Marrow & Gray press room was a sleek extension of its brand. Glass walls, steel accents, curated backdrops of skyline renderings. At exactly 10 a.m., Harrison Gray stepped up to the podium, his designer suit impeccable, his expression a mask of concern. Claudia Voss stood beside him, perfectly poised in navy, mirroring Evelyn's usual style. "Thank you for joining us," Harrison began, voice oozing polished regret. "As many of you know, my partner Evelyn Marrow has stepped down due to personal challenges that have, unfortunately, impacted her professional conduct." The flashbulbs popped. Claudia placed a hand on Harrison's shoulder, a calculated gesture meant to suggest unity, even compassion. "We tried to manage the transition quietly," she added, "but recent erratic behavior made that impossible." Evelyn watched the live stream from her brownstone, jaw tight, fingers poised above her keyboard. She wasn't surprised. They were playing the unstable woman card. She had predicted it. Right on cue, Naomi's text appeared. "Injunctions granted, served in 5 minutes." On screen, Harrison continued. "Marrow & Gray remains committed to stability and growth." He paused as a reporter's phone buzzed loudly, followed by another. A ripple moved through the room. "Mr. Gray," a journalist interrupted, "we're receiving confirmation that an emergency injunction has been filed in federal court, blocking Marrow & Gray from using designs registered under the name Evelyn Zhang. Can you comment?" Harrison froze. Claudia leaned in, whispering urgently. But the damage was done. The camera zoomed in just as his smile cracked. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and whispered, "Checkmate." Night had fallen over Brooklyn when Claudia Voss appeared at the door of Evelyn's brownstone, her polished veneer noticeably cracked. She wore no makeup, no corporate armor, just desperation and something that almost resembled guilt. Evelyn didn't invite her in, only stepped aside enough for her to stand inside the entryway, beneath the soft amber light. 5 minutes, Evelyn said flatly. Claudia nodded and pulled a small silver flash drive from her bag. "After the board meeting, I overheard Harrison on the phone with a developer from Beijing. He's planning to sell the firm within weeks. Our titles, my promotion, your firing, it was just cover to keep the firm steady until he cashes out." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but her expression stayed unreadable. So now you want to be a whistleblower? Claudia's voice dropped. I recorded the call, and others, conversations about falsified financials. Harrison said once the sale's done, he doesn't need any of us, not even me. She hesitated. I didn't know it would go this far, Evelyn. I thought he loved you. I thought I mattered to him. Evelyn didn't flinch. You thought wrong. Claudia extended the flash drive, her hand trembling. I don't want to be collateral damage. Evelyn took it. Gingerly, carefully. She wouldn't plug it into anything yet, but she would verify. As Claudia turned to leave, Evelyn called after her. You've picked a side. I hope for your sake it's the right one. The door clicked shut behind her, but Evelyn stood still for a long moment, holding evidence and a potential traitor in the palm of her hand. Evelyn stared at the flash drive under the soft glow of her desk lamp, its silver casing suddenly heavier with suspicion. She didn't trust gifts wrapped in desperation, especially not from Claudia. Instead of risking her own systems, she delivered it the next morning to Omar Reyes, her most trusted former colleague and tech ally. Within hours, his message came back, encrypted and urgent. Drive is laced with surveillance malware, high-level stuff, meant to hijack your network. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Claudia hadn't come to repent. She'd come to spy. A decoy, a weapon dressed in guilt. That night, her private line rang. The caller ID flashed a name she hadn't seen since the boardroom. Harrison. You really should be more careful about who you let in, he said, voice smooth, smug. Claudia was always better at acting than building. Evelyn's voice remained calm, even as her pulse ticked faster. You must be getting nervous to call me directly. He chuckled. Oh, Evelyn, always the martyr, but predictable. He paused. Did you enjoy the flash drive? Shame if someone had accessed it without proper firewalls. Your safe houses aren't so safe anymore. She let the silence stretch, then said, I didn't plug it in, Harrison. That pause, just 1 second, was all the confirmation she needed. He had expected access. You underestimated me, she continued. Again, his voice darkened. You're playing a dangerous game. Evelyn's answer was measured and razor-sharp. You started this game. I'm just rewriting the rules. As the call ended, Evelyn turned to the wall-mount calendar. Court was in 3 days. So was reckoning. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of old paper and quiet urgency. Evelyn sat outside Judge Farah Monroe's chambers, her hands resting protectively over her lower abdomen, her hospital bracelet still hidden beneath the sleeve of her blazer. Naomi Teller sat beside her, flipping through a worn legal folder thick with evidence. Design patents, email chains, the licensing agreement Harrison had signed and forgotten. Inside the judge's office, Harrison's legal team waited, caught off guard by the speed with which Evelyn had filed. When the door opened, Evelyn rose with calm precision and stepped into the hearing. Judge Monroe glanced over her reading glasses. Mr. Zhang, thank you for your prompt appearance. Marrow, Evelyn corrected gently. Legally, still Marrow. But the designs in question, those were always Zhang. She handed over the notarized licensing agreement, filed before Marrow and Gray ever existed. Harrison's lead attorney called the claims retaliatory, the documents irrelevant, but when Naomi presented the contract's Appendix B, excluding pre-existing IP from company ownership, Judge Monroe raised an eyebrow. You initialed this, Mr. Gray, she said, tapping the document. Shall I read it aloud? The attorney paled. Evelyn remained steady. Your Honor, I'm requesting a temporary injunction to prevent Marrow and Gray from selling or transferring any designs created under my IP until full review. After reviewing the material in silence, Judge Monroe nodded. Request granted. And given the gravity of these claims, I'm appointing a special overseer to supervise all creative operations until ownership is resolved. Evelyn exhaled quietly, her pulse steadying. It was the first legal nail in Harrison's crumbling empire. The glass-walled boardroom of Marrow and Gray buzzed with unease as Harrison stood at the head of the table, mid-pitch. Global urban development is prepared to close within the week, he declared, gesturing toward the digital display. A clean exit, a massive valuation. This is our moment. Claudia Voss stood behind him, nodding dutifully, though her eyes lacked their usual conviction. The doors opened with a soft click. Evelyn entered, pregnant, composed, hospital bracelet still faintly visible beneath her sleeve. A ripple moved through the room, startled board members, a flicker of panic in Harrison's eyes. "This isn't your place anymore," he said sharply. "Security." "I'm well within my rights," Evelyn cut in, laying copies of the court order across the polished table. "As of this morning, a federal judge has barred the sale of this company pending review of intellectual property ownership. Any vote today would violate a court order." Silence. Legal counsel leaned in, whispering frantically to the board chair, Harrison's composure frayed. "She's manipulating you all. She's unstable. Then perhaps the FBI is too," Evelyn replied, turning as two agents stepped into the room, presenting a warrant for financial seizure. Harrison lunged for a nearby laptop, shouting. Evelyn stepped between him and the board, just as the laptop, flung in rage, struck her hard across the abdomen. She gasped, doubling over. The room froze. Even Claudia recoiled. "She's faking," Harrison screamed, now restrained by agents. Evelyn looked up, her voice sharp but steady. "Everything you built? It was always mine. You just sold the facade." And this time no one looked away. 3 days after the boardroom chaos, Evelyn lay in a private hospital suite, fingers curled gently around the swaddled form of her newborn daughter. Isla Zhang Marrow, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a surprisingly fierce cry and Evelyn's sharp brow. The labor had come early, triggered by the stress and trauma of the attack, but the doctors called her recovery remarkable. "Your daughter is strong," Dr. Lin had said, "just like her mother." Evelyn had spent the days since on bed rest while her legal team and Naomi finalized the transition of power. Harrison was denied bail charges of securities fraud, destruction of evidence, and assault on a pregnant partner carried weight, especially with an entire boardroom of witnesses. Meanwhile, Marrow and Gray was reborn as Arden Collective, a firm now grounded in transparency, creativity, and ethical leadership. Claudia Voss, granted limited immunity, turned over everything: emails, financial reports, even recordings. The foundation of Evelyn's case was airtight. From her hospital bed, Evelyn reviewed the firm's restructuring plan, a new leadership council, family leave policies, and open-source architectural collaboration labs. It was everything she'd dreamed of when she'd first sketched a tiny building in her Brooklyn studio. Visitors trickled in. Richard Ellison with white roses, Naomi with soup and sarcasm, Omar with a USB of recovered project files. Each left quietly, letting Evelyn rest. That night, with the city lights glowing beyond her hospital window, Evelyn held Isla close and whispered, "You weren't born into chaos. You were born into clarity. And I promise, what we build now will last." 6 months later, Evelyn Marrow stood at the head of the circular leadership table inside Arden Collective's newly renovated headquarters. The room, once a symbol of hierarchy, was now filled with light, collaborative energy, and the quiet coos of her daughter, Isla, resting in a bassinet beside her. The quarterly review had just concluded. Profits exceeded projections, client renewals were at an all-time high, and employee satisfaction had surged 45% since restructuring. But Evelyn cared more about something less quantifiable. The culture was healing. Architects from across the country were submitting ideas under their own names, innovation was being rewarded over politics, and new parents now had access to flexible schedules and on-site childcare. Isla had become a familiar face in the office, a tiny beacon of the company's rebirth. Across the table, Naomi gave a subtle nod. Harrison Gray's legal team had accepted a full settlement. His name, like his influence, would never again touch the walls of this place. Evelyn reviewed the final agenda item, the launch of the Founder Studio, a mentorship initiative for women and underrepresented voices in design. She looked down at Isla, who blinked up with wide, curious eyes. "We're not just building structures anymore," Evelyn said to the room. We're building legacies. As the board members stood applauding the next chapter, Evelyn walked toward the wide glass windows overlooking Manhattan. This city had nearly broken her. Now she would help reshape it, on her own terms. Isla gurgled softly behind her, reaching for light, and Evelyn smiled. The future was already in her arms. The story of Evelyn Marrow teaches a powerful lesson about resilience, ownership, and the quiet strength of integrity. In a world where betrayal often masquerades as professionalism and power is used to silence rather than uplift, Evelyn's journey reminds us that true leadership is not about titles, but about vision, courage, and accountability. She was underestimated, dismissed, and framed by those closest to her, yet she chose not to crumble. Instead, she moved with strategy, not spite, defending what she had built not just for herself, but for the daughter she was about to bring into the world. Evelyn's story shows that legacy is earned not by conquering others, but by reclaiming truth with grace. She transformed personal pain into structural reform, creating a company where fairness and collaboration replaced ego and deceit. Her victory wasn't just legal, it was emotional, cultural, and generational. We learn that when you stand firmly in your truth, even in the face of calculated betrayal, you don't just survive, you redefine the future. And sometimes, the most profound revolutions are born not in boardrooms, but in quiet nursery rooms, where new life reminds us exactly what's worth fighting for.